The film that leftists want Joker to be is actually the film that Parasite is.
I mean, I think it's way more than that. I think its ambitions are even bigger than Joker's were.
It's like trails and blazes with the map of getting lost, sticking labels on lists on. Fake ladies and males get their shit on, made up and murdered like women gliding with their wings gone.
Hey yo, what is going down? Welcome to Owls at Dawn. We are just two dudes from Southern California who studied philosophy, politics, and religion around the world and decided to start a podcast where we could bullshit with impunity. I am Austin Hayden Smith.
And I'm Troy Polidori.
And this week we are going to be doing a philosophical film analysis of sorts, and I'm sure we'll broaden this out to talk about all kinds of things, class struggle and economic inequality, and also just how to make a good goddamn movie. We're talking about Parasite, motherfuckers. Yeah.
Like we do.
And Troy, you just saw this film because it just came out in the States, right?
Yeah, just this weekend.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I saw it at the Sydney Film Fest like a few months, how many months? Maybe 5 months ago, something like that. And it was fantastic. And then I recently just rewatched it because we talked about it on Wisecracks Show Me the Meaning. And so I watched a screener version as well. So I've seen it twice now. And I don't know, it definitely holds up the second time through. And you see a lot more stuff. So I'm excited to kind of delve into it with you.
Yeah, I was really excited by the fact that I think I saw it Chapter 2 on opening weekend, and that was not a very good movie. But there were more people in the theater to see Parasite here than to see it Chapter 2 on opening weekend. That made me happy.
Interesting. Yeah.
It's getting a lot of crazy buzz, like popular buzz, for a foreign film that's not like an action movie or a horror movie or anything.
Okay, well, we can talk about that too, because I think there's probably some interesting cultural reasons why that's the case. So let's save that for when we get into the main segment here. We do want to just give a quick reminder that if you want to support us, if you find value in what we're producing, if you want us to continue what we're doing, please go to patreon.com/owlsatdawn, and you can sign up for one of our tiers to provide monthly support. $5 gets you the whole shebang, the back catalog of all of our bonus episodes, as well as access to a monthly newsletter, and to be able to recommend episode topics for future polls that we will be running. We'll probably be running one here in the next couple of weeks, and we have a brand new bonus episode that is about the whole, the event, the debacle, the situation, the hubbub, the whatever it is surrounding the brouhaha of Trump getting booed at the baseball game. And actually, a few days later, he got booed at a UFC event as well, Troy, which is interesting. So
yeah, and we actually create some original philosophical content there about the propositional content of the boo, courtesy of Austin.
Right. Yeah, so if you want to know what the boo means in propositional form, go check out that bonus episode because you'll learn something. But first things first, we've got to start off this episode the way we start off every motherfucking episode, and that is with the shitty minute. This is where one of us gets to rant and rave about something that's pissing us off, gets it off of our chest before we start, the main segment here. So, Troy, relieve yourself.
Oh, I'm not sure I appreciate that description of it, but so you're aware of this whole Martin Scorcese brouhaha. I love this term. I'm going to keep using it.
Yeah, I like the word brouhaha too. We also use it in Orange County when we're talking about getting a beer, except we call it a broody haha. A brouhaha. Oh, yeah. Can I get another broody haha? Yeah.
What about is there a Brody haha?
A Brody haha?
When you're broing down with your Brodies?
Yeah, with your boy Brody, because that's what you do in Orange County. You hang out with dudes named Brody. Yes, I am aware of the brouhaha.
So for those who are listening, the basic, I don't remember the original context in which he said it. Maybe it was an interview or something. But Martin Scorsese, famous director of all the classic, crime dramas and gangster films that everyone knows, said something to the degree of Marvel movies not being cinema. And that created a bit of a firestorm. So he went into the New York Times this week and produced an op-ed sort of actually describing his argument and detailing out in a way that's much more nuanced than the kind of like old man yelling at kids on his lawn thing that it seemed like he originally was saying. And it is a more nuanced take. Basically, what Scorsese is saying in the op-ed, and it's not really one sustained argument. It's not really a philosophical argument. It's more just kind of the classic opinion column you might see in like an artistic section of a newspaper. And Scorsese basically says that he thinks cinema has an artistic sort of mode to it. And that has to do with, he describes things like challenging who you are, challenging your preconceptions, detailing the unexpected, but lots of like kind of metaphorical terms, but gets at this idea that art is somehow, coextensive with entertainment, but also has a different dimension to it, right? I think it's important to note the fact that when people talk about art as being different than entertainment, they're not saying that they are completely mutually exclusive. No one thinks that. I don't think anybody thinks that. It's more just like there are certain films that are great in virtue of their artistic value, and they're also entertaining, but their sort of greatness is the artistic value. And there are some films that are really fun and great in terms of or in virtue of their entertainment value, right? And you can kind of distinguish which is which, and you can say certain films have both, and you can talk about the degrees to which they have both, and in virtue of what parts of the films and which modes of the films they have those things, right? So you can make some sort of distinction between artistic value and entertainment value. And I think that's basically what Scorsese is getting at, and pointing out that, and he even mentions the fact that like Hitchcock films are some of the ones that he thinks affected him most artistically, even though really they're kind of like the original version of Marvel films in terms of being like entertainment spectacles and being events for the culture and stuff like that. And so he gets into a lot of these kind of nuanced ideas. And then he ends the op-ed by basically talking a bit about the kind of social political aspects or political economical aspects of cinema these days. Talking about how basically sort of franchise films have crowded out the existence of independent and original artist films. And that he bemoans that, and he's really sad about that, and he wants to encourage people to support independent cinema and not make it so that he has to go to Netflix to make The Irishman, but can actually, he and others can do big films like that and not have to go to and actually have them produced for the theater rather than for the small screen originally.
Yeah, because when you go to Netflix, you're not just using the money of financiers; you're using that platform money and that technology, that techno industry money, which for people who don't work in the film industry, pretty much everybody who works in the film industry on the production side knows that if you want to lose money, you go into filmmaking. That's literally what they say. These are producers who say this. So, there's a great advantage of being able to go to Netflix, but there's also the disadvantage because you lose the theatricality of live theater, or not live theater, but cinematic theater.
Yeah, I'd imagine it's something like, making a video game and then having it have to be originally ported onto like a smartphone or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not ideal. It's not what you're looking for as an artistic medium. So anyway, there's some qualms I have about the op-ed. It's not necessarily a really sound argument overall, although I don't think it's intended to be. It's more meant to be persuasive than anything else. But then some of the response to it on the internet, I think it's just been kind of awful. And it's really funny to me that people kind of come out of the woodwork to basically kind of, I mean, I don't even think it's necessarily like a bad faith thing. I think people just, whenever they see an older white man get grumpy about something or get critical of something, then it's like the pitchforks come out. Or maybe it's just old man in general.
I hadn't seen any of this blowback.
Yeah, a lot of blowback by people, and some of it's coming from the like, let's not disparage this popular thing, right? Because it's popular, and that's fine. Like whatever, people want to get into their like, I like this thing, you can't tell me I can't like it, as if Scorsese is saying you're not allowed to like something. Like obviously he's totally fine with that.
Art is subjective, bro.
Well, that's the thing that really pisses me off, man. And we've talked about this before, right? Like it's literally objects. But like the non-cognitivists come out, right? And they're like, aesthetic judgments are just boos and yays and shit like that. That's what non-cognitivists sound like. Always sound like that. They always sound like a dude from Jersey who's just had 6 beers. And that's just I can't deal with that shit, man. Don't be reducing aesthetic judgments to boos and yays, right? It's wrong. Look up the embedding problem, all right? Non-cognitivism is false. These are cognitive judgments, true and false judgments. Now, you want to argue about those? Argue about those. That's fine, right? Scorsese's argument is not a really good or sound argument. Like, break it down that way if you really wanted to, show off how much you dislike Scorsese or think that old man yelling on his lawn thing is going on. But don't, reduce the entire debate into, rallying for your team. Like, that's some bullshit, right? If you like Marvel films, you like Marvel films. No problem, right? I spend way too much time caring about basketball and a lot of the dumb drama shit in basketball. If someone came out and was like, this is a waste of time, you should spend more of your time doing things of value, I'd be like, you know what? You're right. No problem. I'm still going to do it, though. That's fine. Just don't get on this high horse and be like, I'm going to create this philosophical argument, which makes this whole thing we're doing completely worthless and stupid. And also, the vast majority of things that people do all the time are going to be completely misguided. That's just not cool, bro. Don't do that.
I mean, the thing that I don't get is why are people clamoring so hard to preserve the term cinema or film for something that doesn't need that categorization in order to earn clout, right? But for some reason, they've almost cathectically imbued the word film or cinema so much that if the thing that they then have some other type of attachment to is not included in that category, then they feel personally attacked, that somehow denigrates the value that they give to this object. You don't think of a TikTok video as cinema. Now, you may love the fucking TikTok video because it might be really cool and ingenious. Maybe this person did something great. Maybe it's funny. Maybe it's emotional. Maybe the creator is really talented. Whatever. But you don't give a shit if I walk up to you and I'm like, hey, I just want you to know that's not cinema. As much as you could qualify the shit out of it and be like, well, it's a TikTok film, non-standard 5-second short film. Use whatever fucking qualifications you want so that you can maintain some sort of, categorization that you're comfortable with. It's still not fucking cinema, right? So I don't, again, understand why you care, not you, Troy, but why people care so much about needing to preserve the categorization of these Avenger products or these superhero products, these Marvel products within that domain. What is won and what is lost? And that is what I think is interesting. And so when I see the hubbub of them freaking out about somebody being critical of it, what I would want to do is I'd want to kind of unpack this and say, well, what is this larger category that you're afraid that you're losing your grip on? And why are you so invested in that? Because I'll be honest, I don't think that the Marvel films are cinema. And I had a conversation with Kier about this when the Endgame, was that the last Avengers film came out? And Kier, for people who are listening, we did this podcast called I Dig This Movie. We still might do it. I don't know. We didn't do it ever since I got sick, but called I Dig This Movie. Kier talked about this, has written about this on public Facebook posts and stuff like that, about how he thinks that the Avenger films, the last 2 in particular, how they're not cinema. And that they signal the end of cinema in a lot of ways. And he's not saying that in a sense that he doesn't like them. He likes them. He likes them enough. They're good products for what they are. You get invested in the characters. They build characters. They create worlds. They create tension and drama, and there's affect and all kinds of things. But is it cinema? Is there something qualitatively different between The Searchers and Avengers Endgame? And for Kier, yes, and I would imagine for Scorsese, yes as well. So the question is what is it that we use to categorize? Now, are they just differences of degree, or is there a sense in which differences of degree even are so great that we then start moving into different qualitative designations altogether? And so I just don't understand why people are trying so hard to cling to this categorization,
I think it's obvious that there's a sense in which they see an evaluative judgment there that isn't necessarily there. When you say something isn't cinema, you're denigrating it. You're claiming something else is superior, and you're telling someone that they're childish for engaging in it. And that probably comes with the sort of, maybe subconscious sense in which someone feels like this is a child's thing that I'm doing, and if someone calls me out on it, like I'm gonna like the attack claws are gonna come out or whatever, and that's just not. No one's claiming that. Like, does anybody like yell at LeBron James and say you play a child's game for millions of dollars? Like, I mean, maybe some people do that, but no one cares. Like, is it true? Kind of, yeah. It's a child's game, but who cares? Like, it's entertaining and it's fun and people like it. It's not a big deal if it's a child's game or not, in this like some historical sense or whatever. So yeah, I think it's a sense in which it feels to some people like they're being attacked. When
it's like the World Series of Poker, man. Is that a sport? It's on fucking ESPN. Is it a sport? A lot of people would say, sure, it's a sport, I guess. It's a fucking game, man. It's a card game. It's not a sport. Are they athletes? Like, yeah, they have great mental concentration. You have to sit there for long periods of time. They have to be very adept at mathematics. Obviously, poker nowadays is purely just like a mathematical game. So is it some kind of athletic endeavor? I mean, maybe if you stretch the definition of athletics, but again, like, so then who's an athlete? Is a bowler an athlete? Is a curler an athlete? And then even then, like, then who's a better athlete? Well, gymnasts are like the most athletic in terms of like all around athletics based on how you define athletics in one way. So then that means that is a fucking gymnast just in a different degree of athletic category than a fucking Daniel Negreanu, great poker player. I mean, this is where categorization kind of gets slippery, but I think people need to chill the fuck out and not hold on so tightly to these categories. And I think actually what it shows is their own neurosis, right? Like you just even kind of hinted at it, where you're kind of like, no, if they feel that insecurity, it's that they have somehow invested into these categories. Why don't we just think about things in terms of like post-cinema? And let's be kind of okay with that. And it can still be good and fun and valuable and culturally important and popular and instructive, et cetera, et cetera. But does it need to be categorized as cinema? I mean, maybe I just am not committed to things in life, and so I just don't give a shit about the category. So I don't care.
This is your polyamory coming into the conceptual sphere?
Yeah, exactly, man. Like, who gives a fuck, dude? Call it whatever the fuck you want. Go see them, and don't worry if Martin Scorcese doesn't categorize them as cinema. And don't even worry, even if he comes out and says he doesn't like them. Boo-hoo, motherfucker. Just be like, okay, you're gonna die soon, old man, and then whatever. Like, why does it matter? People fucking relax. Smoke some weed, motherfuckers. That's all I gotta say. Chill out.
I agree. I think the important point is just whatever, categorizations you want to use or however slippery you think concepts can be, it doesn't really matter. The important thing is there is a strong qualitative difference between Marvel films and the kinds of things Scorsese is talking about. And I don't think anybody denies that, really, right? It's like, let's just point out the qualitative difference and talk about it. It doesn't have to be denigrating to be that, right? To just ignore the differences is obviously kind of fruitless, right? And if you care about these things a lot, you think you'd want to think about them more.
Yeah, and even if somebody does denigrate it, then you don't have to engage in the level of affect that has been established by these other people. You can then stop it, and you can be a productive force and be like, even though I don't denigrate it, I see what Scorsese is saying. Is there something interesting that we can productively use with his words? That is how you can be really kind of critically, like productive and critical and smart and constructive. That's what I think. I mean, but fuck it. What do I know?
That said, dude, I'm going to engage in some like practical contradiction here and be like, do you remember seeing the original Sam Raimi Spider-Man film in like 2002 or whenever it was?
I mean, I've seen it. I don't, yeah, but go ahead.
Yeah, with Tobey Maguire, that one.
Yeah.
Like, I remember that film being really good. And for some reason, even though it's not like, I think a great film or anything, it stuck with me for a long time. And I just randomly like think about it at certain points. It's a really good movie. It's a well done film. And then I think about that and compare it to the last few Avengers films, and just nothing from those movies sticks with me. Literally nothing. And so yeah, it seems to me that even in the superhero genre from like the early days and even stuff like the Dark Knight and things like that, there's that strong qualitative difference has undergone even in the superhero genre, I think, over the last decade and a half. So yeah, I mean, kind of attuning yourself to that difference and thinking about it is important. It doesn't have to necessarily be denigrating or telling people that they're bad or childish for liking these movies. but just kind of pointing out that there is a difference here and thinking about why it's the case and what effect it has on cinema. Like that's just what it means to engage in like artistic criticism in the objective sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And then, of course, I think the real critical element of all of this is then, and I haven't read the article yet, but I'm sure he touches on this a little bit, but it's something that we've talked about. It's something that many others have talked about, is the financial model that is really driving the big blockbuster films, right? You have a lot of people who blame like Jaws basically as being the film that ruined cinema, because that's when you get the end of New Hollywood. So you no longer do you have, independent auteurs, and now you just have these money machines, the big blockbuster machines that drive the cinematic industry. And so you get that only intensified to the hilt in the age of financialization. Obviously, Jaws comes out at the beginnings of financialization, but I'm talking about financialization in full steam ahead. So you're talking about massive returns now, films that can issue massive that can be used as derivative products that are being financed by financiers who are engaged in other elements of financial speculation, and they become elements of like speculation, really is what they are, And so yeah, you could make a $60 million film and then maybe get $75 million, or you can make a film for $300 million, and even if you only make $700 million, you've still made a shitload of money. And of course, but the goal now is to always break $1 billion, right? And so that's the whale that you're always trying to capture. And so that changes what content is created, because it's got to be $1 billion film, and then it's got to be a franchise that has action figures and sequels and video games and cereal box covers and costumes for Halloween and stuff like that. So it's got to be $1 billion industries now that are ultimately going to drive the industry. So the cinematic industry, the film industry. And so that is I think what becomes the more interesting, problematic, and I would say robust area for analysis and concentration. And then thinking about it from that perspective, then I would ask this: if I'm going to grant myself all the negative critiques that I would have about how these are just like financial products of speculation, are they then cinematic pieces? Are they films? Or are they just simply financial instruments? And that, I think, would be a much more interesting approach to the analysis.
Yeah, and it's funny when you think about kind of recently it's been burgeoning, and people are getting worried about the notion that China's slowly becoming a bigger market than the U.S. and eventually will outstrip it for cinema, for American films. And so this has affected the fact that you don't see Chinese antagonists in major films anymore, and there's often a subplot that involves someone who's Chinese who does something heroic, or is in some sense like a side protagonist, or China somehow gets involved as a side protagonist to kind of placate viewers there and make it marketable in China. And it's like people sometimes get worried about that, thinking about how this marketization is affecting the content of the films. And it's like, motherfucker, what do you think has been going on for the last 30 years? Just because now it involves people who look a little different, we're getting all worried about it. Like this logic has existed and has been dominating big budget cinema for much longer than the last 5 years.
Yeah, I got a buddy who's really into some of these books that have been written about how the CIA has used cinema and stuff like that. And I haven't gotten into any of this. Have you read in any of that stuff?
No, I'm vaguely familiar with that idea. No.
Yeah, and I mean, he's basically like, look, it's not even subtle. They're very explicit about this. They use, they have people who are producers, financiers, writers, and stuff like that to make films like Top Gun. Top Gun is literally a film that was made with the help of the United States Navy, for example, right? And something along, I can't remember what the number is, but like the enrollment numbers in the U.S. Navy, I think in the military in general, but in the U.S. Navy in particular, increased like X amount after the release of Top Gun, and it's like measurable or something like that. And obviously maybe there's a correlation causation thing going on there, but it's pretty much assumed that had a positive impact on the image of being a naval aviator, or the image of the Navy more generally.
Same thing happens in video games too, right? The Call of Duty games.
Oh, hell yeah. Totally, right? So, I mean, then that makes you think, then what is a film? Is a film, it's much more than just a story. It's much more than just, these parameters that we might tend to think about, and we need to start expanding on those things. And then when you start thinking about that in the age today of marketization, like you were saying, in the age of financialization, where everything is just a product for speculation, then what the fuck is an Avenger film? Is it really cinematic, or is it just some sort of cultural product to get people to spend more money? And then we actually, kind of similar to Chomsky's argument in Manufacturing Consent, where where the readership aren't the customers, but we're the product that's sold. Similarly here, like the people who go to see the film and who buy the products, we're not the actual customers. We're the product that's sold to the financiers of the future who are going to speculate big by investing $300-400 million. So then it turns into a financial product in a completely different way, right? It inverts the order, the hierarchy, right? We tend to think of ourselves as being the customer. We're not the customer. We're the fucking product that the studio can sell to the financier to say, look, we have projections on pre-sales, foreign pre-sales in China and Nigeria and in Bollywood to the tune of $500 million. Therefore, you need to give us $300 million to make this film because we can already guarantee a return on your investment. That's a totally different logic.
Yeah, I mean, do you think that that the LSD industry, big hallucinogenic, is financing Gaspar Noé films?
Oh, it must, man. It must. That and the DMT and the fucking ketamine, the K-hole culture. Because what does he smoke in Enter the Void? It's DMT, isn't it?
I don't remember.
I'm pretty sure it's DMT that he smokes in Enter the Void, which gives him that that crazy trippy experience before he ends up getting killed. Yeah. But yes, that as well.
All right, so should we move on to talking about Parasite?
Yes, let's keep this film discussion going.
Yeah, good film episode. I hope your sticky leaves is a film episode. Otherwise, you're going to kill the continuity here, dude.
Oh, god damn it. Okay, I'll think about something I can change it to during this conversation.
So, Bong Joon-ho's Parasite has been getting, I mentioned back in the cold open, that it's been getting quite a bit of buzz for a foreign film, first of all. And then, secondly, a foreign film which is basically a drama. I guess there's some thriller elements to it, but it's mostly like a family drama. Although, of course, Bong Joon-ho always kind of mixes genres in these really kind of like Frankenstein ways, which are wonderful. But I'm at least surprised at how much buzz it's getting in the mainstream press. Even kind of pushed for like a Best Picture nod in the Oscars and stuff like that. And I guess Roma got that last year or 2 years ago, whatever that was. But I guess that seemed a little different given that Cuarón kind of already had this like dominant status in American cinema, having done like Gravity and stuff like that. And certainly, even though Bong Joon-ho's done English language films like Okja, Snowpiercer, those were nowhere near as big as Gravity or, having Sandra Bullock and George Clooney in it and stuff like that. So this seems a little bit different than that. Would you think?
Totally. I mean, I do think that part of the success is because Okja was big on Netflix and because Snowpiercer had, a leading Hollywood sex symbol in it. And then it also had a successful run on Netflix as well. So I feel like as a director, his star is on the rise. And so that probably contributes to its popularity. Then, of course, it does really well at Cannes and it wins the Palme d'Or. And then it just dominates the film circuit. It came to Sydney and it won the top prize at Sydney Film Fest as well. So it's got tons of critical praise, but then I think even audience enjoyment really has just spread as well. I mean, I can't tell you how many people I have had reach out to me on Twitter or to Wisecrack on Twitter, or reviews that I've read, blogs that I've read that are telling people who have seen it in a festival to other people around the world, like, you have to see this movie. You have to see this movie. So, there's just so much momentum around it. So when it finally does get its theatrical release in the States or in the UK, I don't know if it's out yet in the UK, it makes sense that it would be kind of supported by all of these other various like momentum factors.
Yeah, and I think those all contribute to it. That said, I mean, winning the Palme d'Or at Cannes means nothing when it comes to like American mainstream success, right? There have been winners of that prize that have not even probably been released in American cinemas. Like, didn't Wind Shakes the Barley win the Palme d'Or?
Damn fucking straight it did.
Yeah, I mean, that
one of my favorite movies ever.
Yeah, it's a great movie. It's even like quasi in English, not the way Americans would think of it. But yeah, that film had like no effect on like mainstream cinema. At least I don't remember it having any effect.
No, you're right. It didn't.
So yeah, it just seems to me like there's something about this film, like it's got that je ne sais quoi about it that it's making it affect audiences in a way you could not predict from the sum of its parts, right?
Well, do you think it's the political and social climate?
I mean, I want to believe that, don't you?
I mean, I do think that's what it is. I mean, like, okay, we talked about this. Remember when we did our Joker episode, and I said, you were talking about the stairs, and I said, you want to know a film that does the stairs better? And I said, Parasite.
Yeah, dude.
Right? And there's something about how I think you could actually even read these two films together, and you could say, the film that leftists want Joker to be is actually the film that Parasite is.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's way more than that. I think its ambitions are even bigger than Joker's were.
100%.
Even as a side effect, it kind of out Joker's Joker, and that's not because Joker's a bad film. It's not a bad film, I don't think. But Parasite's just a wonderful film in so many different ways, which is what I referenced this before, but Umberto Eco once said that he was referring to literature, but any sort of story-based, narrative-based art is a great piece of that is a machine of interpretation or a machine for interpretations. And I don't think that he meant by that this is so vague and ambiguous that you can do whatever you want with it. But no, it actually has a productive quality to it that makes you churn out interpretations that aren't necessarily contradictory or ambiguous, but that gives you so much more to work with than lesser pieces do. And when I saw Parasite, I walked out of the film and I thought, I have no idea what I just saw, but I want to think about it for like 3 straight days. And you can do that because not only is it like enrapturing, like there's the thriller element to it and a mystery element to it and everything
Twist.
else. Yeah, big twists and stuff like that.
And there's humor and there's love relationships and there's friendships and there's I know this almost has no meaning to it, but there's a real human element to it. I just mean interpersonal. There's a lot of interpersonal stuff going on.
That's the thing, dude. There's so many films out there that are trying to capture this sense of the social, right, and do some social criticism, which of course Joker was trying to do as well. And sometimes the problem with that can be that it's bloodless. That's basically just like reading a philosophical essay, but in less clear form. But it's important to have an aspect of social criticism, right? What I think this film gets so well is you can talk about the social without involving the social as a character in the film at all. Right? You can talk about, you can do social critique through the lens of like 6 people, right? Or 7 people.
2 families.
Yeah, these 2 families. And this film is the opposite of bloodless. It's so effective in that affective sense. And yet also has this like super strong, huge social universal element to it. And I said, I want to believe that it's the social political element of it that people are grasping onto. And I really hope that it is. I don't have, this is an empirical question really, but I want to think that, and I hope that there's a sense in which people see this. And even though, Americans oftentimes aren't able to connect with like, East Asian cinema in this way, it's a universal film. These are experiences that everybody can grab onto, no matter who they are. And I think the film was made, Bong Joon-ho has this kind of, I think, universalist element to him in all his films. And I want to think that that's the element that people are grasping onto. The universal singular, right? Or singular universal.
Right. This thing, yeah, exactly. So at Sydney Film Fest, he was here introducing the film, and he came out on stage and he said, people constantly ask me, what does the title mean? What's the parasite? Who's the parasite? What is Parasite? And he said,
Parasite are the friends we made along the way, dude.
He said, honestly, this is just a family film. And he walked off stage. And as funny as that might be, because there's obvious irony in that. It is just a family film in some ways, right? But it's precisely what you said. It's the singular universal. It's that you can look at a family. You could look at two families in particular and their interactions from different sides of the track, let's say, or from different levels of ascension and descension on the stairs or the social ladder, even, which would be more kind of in line with the visual motif that he employs. And you can say that we can look at these two families and we can derive from that so much about the status of South Korea, so much about the history. I mean, they even have a bit where they're talking about the newscasters in North Korea, right? And how they talk and stuff like that. And I think there's actually a lot of interesting political stuff going on there as well, right? But you can look at this like, what kind of food do they eat? Where do they shop? There's reference multiple times to different people have this cake store that goes bust. The father of the Kim family, is that what they're called, the Kim family? He has a cake shop that goes bust, and then also the guy who's down in the basement, he has a cake shop. He mentions that his cake shop goes bust, and apparently this was like a really big deal in Korea in like 2010, 2013, something like that, where like this industry completely just collapsed, right? And so a lot of like small businesses, small retailers completely went under, and so like, but you can derive these larger economic things, but also just understand that someone's small business just got destroyed and the impacts that will have on a family in terms of now you've got loans and now you don't have money to bring in and a steady income, and then what kind of pressure is that going to put on you in the relationship with your wife, and do you still love your wife? And then you have the rich family, the Park family, and there's this amazing bit where the father turns around to him. He's driving Mr. Park around, and he's kind of teasing about the wife, and he's like, but you still love her, right? And Mr. Park's like, yeah, we'll call it love, right? And so it's like even this rich family that is supposed to be held up as the ones who, like, the mother says, they have all the cracks are all ironed, the creases are all ironed out, and even they have cracks, right? They're the rich family, but they still have their cracks, right? And so there's just so much going on at the interpersonal, at the social, at the political, at the economic level going on, and it's just a family film. I mean, not just a family film, but it is a family film, and I think that's a demonstration of what it means to be a masterful storyteller, is to be able to do both, to be able to have, like you say, to avoid bloodlessness while at the same time aiming towards the universal in the abstract, and that's amazing.
Yeah, dude. I mean, think about like Snowpiercer, right? If there ever was like a purely structuralist film, right? Like doing structural critique, it's something like Snowpiercer, and it's a really good and fun, entertaining, and thoughtful film, I think. But it does have some of that element of bloodlessness, right? And so it kind of has to have that really nasty shock at the end of the movie,
because it's kind of just a parable almost.
Yeah. Which, yeah, I mean, the ultimate structural storytelling mode is like the parable, right?
Yeah, because they're
really
just like
care about the
archetypes
characters at
and
all. Yeah.
yeah,
Which
they're
is
not
fine.
like humans.
There's nothing bad about
They're
that.
just placeholders.
Yeah, but if you can achieve making a film that's effective and is about small scale things and that makes you feel strongly all these different emotions, and then use that to point towards like this structural critique, that's what the great films do, right? And there's so few that can really achieve that. I know a lot of people have said that something they found refreshing about the film is that the rich people aren't demonized. I thought that was really interesting, that I've heard that from several different sources that I've read and heard. And this isn't like necessarily like from conservatives, right? This is from liberals and left, people of the left, generally speaking. And I thought that's really interesting because I think it points to this notion that we have so many films that are trying to get at this idea of like how wealth inequality and political inequality affect the relations between individuals in a society. And that's obviously true, and we should speak about that. But I think there's something to the degree of people being kind of exhausted at the idea of having like the It's a Wonderful Life type set up with like the evil rich person and the good humble poor people squaring off in some like battle for ultimate power in society. And as much as there's truth to that, obviously, in the structural critique there, it's missing something, right? It's missing something about how our relations with each other are affected by social and structural conditions. And
well, that's why I think the name Parasite is probably best read as being read about the relationship, a parasitical relationship.
It's a relational term. You can't be a parasite by yourself.
Exactly. Which means that it is everywhere. Like everyone is being parasitical insofar as they are manifestations or deputies, let's say, for the logic of Parasite, which is that ubiquitous kind of macro category. And yeah, I 100%. I said this in the Wisecrack podcast. The reason that I think this film is so beautiful is that it doesn't preach at you, right? Like it's clearly critical and it's clearly trying to draw out some of the anxieties of economic precarity and economic inequality. But at the same time, it's not somebody standing on their soapbox beating you over the head with their political ideology.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, so I wanted to get your opinion on this because I'm still trying to deal with why I find this this idiom in the film so like powerful. Okay. The idea of smelling, comes throughout the film, right? Park, the father, the rich father, he several times in the film smells Mr. Kim, and references the idea that certain kinds of people who use the subway or who live in the poor neighborhoods, smell a certain way, right? And it's just, kind of innately disgusting. But they deal with it, right? It's just like, the thing you deal with to get good help or whatever. And it's like the only hint you really get of like a real dark side of Park, right? What did you think about that reoccurrence throughout the film of the...
Well, that's the trigger that really ultimately sets off Kim,
so it's obviously
killing
important.
him at the end. So, yeah, I mean, I kind of took that as being, kind of like no matter what, you will never get that stench of poverty off of you. There's the bit where the son, the poor son, I can't remember his name right now, Kevin, we'll call him, that's his American name that he uses in the house. He's with the daughter at the birthday party, and he's looking out the window at the birthday party, and he says, do you think I'll ever fit into this setting? And I think the idea is that even he is aware that he won't, because then previous to that, there's the bit where they're all drunk and they're sitting downstairs in the living room, right? And they're talking about how, like, if he marries the daughter, then this will be his house, and they're planning for it. But then he's like, oh, yeah. But then they're like, but you'll have to, like, hire actors to be your parents, to be the in-laws, because you can't have your real parents do it. So again, there's always this disconnect. He's never going to authentically have him and his family. And I think it's important that it's the family unit that is central up until the very end. But the family unit is so central. So his family will never be brought into that world. He will never be able to bring them into that world fully. Even if he fits into the setting, he will never get that stench off of him, right? No matter what. Like, even if he were to marry her and play this charade for the next 30 years or whatever, that stench will remain. And I think that's what sets off Mr. Kim to kill Mr. Park at the end, when Mr. Park rolls the guy over and has to get the car keys, and he plugs his nose because the stench is so bad, right? And that's the boiling point. That's it. That's the unconscious rage that Fanon talks about of the colonized, because it has been repressed and suppressed, and they have stayed in their lane and they've accepted their subordinated role. But eventually it just bursts forth, right? It can't be contained any longer. And I think that the smell is like the return of the repressed. You can repress it. You can put it down in the basement. You can put it down the stairs. You can plug your nose. You can ignore it. But you can't ever fully get rid of it. And it will come back. And the way that it comes back here is it bursts out in violence. And that's what happens when Mr. Kim kills Park.
Yeah, that's a common thing, right? Even in social unrest is... milk rises by 10 cents or train fares increase by 10 cents or whatever, right? And then the news will say that happened. And so there's a social unrest that was caused. And it's like, yeah, I mean, that was the efficient cause, like the proximate cause of this happening, right? But that's clearly the boiling over of so much else that's gone on. And I think it was brilliant to have that be the moment, since it was a recurring thing. And I think it's just so powerful, right? Smell is such a powerful disgust experience, right? There's nothing else that you experience as disgusting as much as a smell.
Well, yeah, and remember, too, at the beginning, the infestation of bugs that the Kims have in their house, what kind of bugs are they? They're stink bugs.
Oh, yeah, I didn't think about that.
Remember, he says, the damn stink bugs, and so they get fumigated. And I think that's really symbolically rich.
Yeah, they get
And then, of course,
accidentally
you have,
fumigated.
yeah, they get accidentally fumigated. That's right. There's a lot of fucking humor in this film too. Which, is there any filmmaker that can weave together like drama and tension and thriller and then just laugh out loud hysterical humor? Like, oh god. But yeah, so that's it. So it's stink bugs. So the notion of smell is set up from the very beginning. Sorry to cut you off.
No, yeah, and disgust. And speaking of like laugh out loud, the funniest part of the film for me is when the daughter of the Kims, they get home and after the flooding has occurred, right? And like the sewer is bursting forth through the toilet. And so to stop it, she just sits in the toilet and like smokes a cigarette while like all this nasty sewage just blasting up through the toilet underneath her.
Right.
I was laughing so hard. It's such a weird, ridiculous moment in this film, like completely cartoonish.
Yeah.
And is it common, do you think, in South Korea for these toilets to be like raised almost to the ceiling? That was such a bewildering shot or like production design choice for me.
Yeah, I don't know. If we have any, native Koreans or people who have spent a lot of time in Korea, let us know, because I've never been, and I haven't been able to ask any of my Korean like colleagues or friends about that. So I don't know.
Another thing I loved about, there's so many things you can talk about in terms of like production choices here. The two homes, how they're designed. And I read that they actually designed the homes on a lot. These are not pre-existing homes that they use. They designed them on every piece of it on purpose and a lot. And
Crazy, huh?
Yeah, it's totally nuts. And both of them, well, it seems like the Park's home is much more heavily windowed than the Kim's home. And yet the window in the Park's home, the big rich home, has this vista of like a painting, right? Like a painting of nature, right? With all the trees and just beautiful green in the sky. And then the windows are much smaller in the Kim's home, but they go straight into the street and everyone can see into it. There's no privacy. To the point where like a person keeps coming by to piss on on their window, basically. There's just no privacy there, even though it's less heavily windowed than the Park's home. This is a very strong element of the way the homes depict the relations people have to have with one another.
Interesting. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that before. I wonder if that there's something also then about the state of the impoverished as being exposed, right? And I think that kind of also fits when the rainstorm comes. Their home gets flooded. So a rainstorm, a natural event, is a disaster for the poor. It exponentially affects the poor neighborhood as the water goes downhill. But the people uphill, the Parks, for them it's a game. Their kid is sitting out in his fucking tent having fun in the rainstorm, while the parents talk dirty to each other and finger each other on the sofa, right?
Yeah, I was almost offended by how like frivolous they were with the rain. Right. Yeah, it's time to play games.
Yeah.
People's homes
you play
are
a game
destroyed.
while your neighbors are fucking drowning and being completely displaced, and they have to sleep in a shelter in a gymnasium packed with everybody else because they've just lost everything. But for them, it's a game. And is that not an accurate depiction of what happens between social classes? Not just when a crisis occurs, which exponentially always affects the poor more than it does the rich anyway, but also just in general, like when something that you can think of as being like a nice, fun thing where it's raining and you can play in the streets and make sure you got your rain gear on, but nevertheless, there are people who are, experiencing mudslides and the mud's falling on top of them and stuff like that. And I'm not saying that mudslides don't affect big houses that are on the hills and shit like that as well, but come on, man, put your house in a different fucking spot. I'm from a place where like mudslides were very common too, with like the big wealthy homes and shit like that. It happened all the time. And I remember just being like, why are all these homes built there? Like it's so stupid, but it's because you get a great fucking view, man. So that sucks. But then again, you got homeowners insurance, and most of the time those homes don't get ravaged. But the people down at the bottom of the hill, they're the ones dealing with the mudslides. They're the ones that have the muds fill up their homes, and they disproportionately, there's an asymmetry here, right, on how things affect the different social classes.
Yeah. And I think, the thing that affected me most, I kind of want to talk about this for a little bit before we like move on. We've talked about this idea of relations with one another and how it's such a strongly relational film, especially between the two families. And I mentioned earlier that, people have been celebrating the fact that the movie was able to make this kind of structural and social critique without demonizing the rich people, or making them like innately, inherently, intentionally evil people. And I think that what that's really getting at, what's great about the film that I came out of it so excited and jazzed about, is that the film basically, I think it was saying, and maybe this isn't intentional, maybe I'm reading it off of it, you can tell me. These two families cannot possibly relate to each other rightly. They are disallowed from having proper relations with one another by the social conditions that exist. And that's the parasite idea gets at, right? To live, a parasite has to use somebody else, right, for means and sustenance. And so the Kims have to sort of see the Parks as means to an end, right? A way to get enough money to live, because otherwise they have to subsist on like folding pizza boxes, which that was too real for me, by the way, as someone who has gotten to the point where they can fold pizza boxes in like 3 seconds flat.
Yeah.
So they can't properly relate to the Parks, even if they wanted to, right? And so Kevin gets at that, right? When he thinks about wanting to relate to them properly, like wanting to marry their daughter, but that could never really happen, right? In like a proper way. It has to involve incredible deception, right, to ever happen. But the Parks also can't relate to the Kims. They're just constitutively unable to do so. They only can see them as someone who's being paid to help them out, right? And they're parasitical too, right? Like they can't have their lives of Mr. Park going out and working all day and going on business trips. And then his wife basically not really knowing how to do anything in the home, right? They can't have that life without having people to help them and do all this work that they are not going to do. So they have to be parasitical on each other to live their life. They're disallowed from having proper relations to each other. And that ends up with this incredible violence once it comes to the point where, I thought that even before the smelling incident, it was the Park telling Kim, you don't want to do this whole like faux Indian invasion thing or whatever, but just you're being paid, so just do it, right? Think about it as your work. Right. And it's like, my home was just destroyed. I spent all night in a shelter. And now I have to think about my job as being this kind of demeaning birthday party thing where everyone else here is here because they're a friend, right? But I'm here because I'm a tool, right? For your amusement. And that's just such an obvious way in which that employment relationship is parasitical and it's not respectful of the person as a human being. And that is not a proper relation people should have with one another. And so it ends up in this incredible violence because people can't take that. It's not right. And I thought it was such a brilliant way of capturing that without necessarily having to have like the incredible like mob violence of like a Joker, right? There's violence, right? But that wasn't necessarily, that was more just like the topping, right? Than it is like the actual.
And the violence is far more impactful than when Arthur shoots Robert De Niro. I thought, like, I didn't care about their relationship really. Like, yeah, he's a father figure, whatever, blah, blah, blah. I think I mentioned that in the Joker podcast. But when the man comes out from the basement and stabs and the daughter gets stabbed, and then even when the little boy gets stabbed because the knife goes through, and then when Mr. Kim stabs Mr. Park, I mean, that, like, you're like, fuck! Like, the effect of that violent outburst was really, it was really rooted in the rest of the narrative, and so the release was just extremely impactful to me, you know?
And then the frustration of knowing that Park won't understand this. He won't understand why this happened. Yeah. It will seem like a moment of insanity, which in some sense it was, right? Because it wasn't like a planned out thing. It wasn't a means to an end as an action, right? But we get it, having viewed the Kim's life. And the Parks they'll never get it. Right? They'll never understand why this really happened. And that incredible cathartic release, but then also that frustration of knowing that we kind of have an insight that they can't have. It's this incredible like juxtaposition of emotions, right?
I have a psychoanalytic reading about this whole thing that you're talking about right now, and I have a question about it. So here's the thing. So you're talking about how it's their relation to one another and that they can never relate to each other immediately. So there's always a mediatory element that that conditions their relationship, right? So I have two examples. So the first example is Kevin relating to the Parks when he first gets his job. And how does he get his job? He has Mrs. Kim sit in on the tutorial that he's giving to the daughter. And it isn't because he's a great tutor. It isn't because his English is extremely proficient. It isn't because he has the qualifications. What is the thing that gets her to hire him? It's because he uses the language of like hustle culture. He talks about how taking an exam is like slashing through the jungle. And it's like that grab the bull by the horns, make Monday your bitch kind of positive Gary V kind of shit, right? Like, you got this, girl. You got to fucking crush this shit, right? And then she like immediately, and it's a hard cut to her forking over cash. Like, you're hired because you can motivate my daughter, because you are like a brand salesman, right? Mm-hmm. So the way that he relates is because he can wear the mask. He can use the mediatory brand of like late capitalist positivity culture or whatever it is, right? And then similarly, so that's how he can relate to them. He has to like have that as the mediator. And then similarly, or like maybe the opposite of that is when the Parks have sex, the husband makes a comment about how like if she was wearing those cheap underwear, then that would get him really hard, right? Yeah. And so there's something about the fantasy. Yeah, that was
a psychoanalytic perversion right there, yeah, for sure.
Right? So there's something about the fantasy of them role-playing or her being like a dirty little poor girl from the other side of the tracks wearing cheap underwear, and that's going to turn me on so much more. It'll make me want to fuck you even more, right? So there's, for both of them, there's some sort of mediatory image or fantasy. And here's my question then. Is that mediatory tendency precisely what defines the psychoanalytic reading of what is parasitical? That's what's parasitical. The fact that you have to have a mediatory relationship and a fantasy to sustain your relation, and that's what ultimately eats at you because it's a deficient image.
Yeah, I mean, I would take qualms a little bit with the distinction between immediate and mediate there, just because, I mean, all relations are mediatory in some sense, I think. It's more like what is the mediator? And I think that, yeah, I didn't think about this, but yeah, the idea of the sexual perversion, right, is the ultimate example of like using poor people as basically non-humans, right? Treating them as tools. And that's what's wrong about it, right? The mediation is one where you're sort of using the person as a tool, not respecting them as an actual human being, or as a human person with like desires and ends that are just like yours. And that's the crucial thing that's wrong. And I think that, yeah, the psychoanalytic perversion there that's happening is a great example of that. Like and especially since, if I remember correctly, the Kims are hearing him say that, right? They're underneath the table.
They're under the table. Yeah.
So like they're hearing themselves being thought of as this like fantasy. Yeah, which is awful to think about, like that contributing towards your own view of yourself, and how just ashamed you would be having to deal with that.
Yeah, is there something, I mean, like we might think like, oh, it's cool if somebody uses me as a sex object, but that's when you've kind of like, you've got a trust relationship. Yeah. That's right.
You already have a respectful relationship when this is just a thing you both want to do.
Exactly. But when you are just simply objectified and you are listening to that, like, I am going to get really hard and I'm going to fuck you. Like, I'm going to penetrate you. I'm going to dominate you for my enjoyment and take from you your vitality. And I'm going to suppress the subjectivity of that and completely diminish that for my gain. And that is what is so perverse about it. And that is what is so interesting. So I almost wonder if like all of these things were meant to read into the buildup of that moment of the signification when Mr. Park holds his nose in disgust of the smell that then causes Kim to kill him. That you're meant to even think of like all of this stuff. Like
it all comes flooding back, yeah. A bad filmmaker would have had a montage.
Right.
Of his mental state, exactly. And you know what was so fantastic? I've been thinking about this a lot since I saw the film. How many times this notion comes across with Park, especially saying how Kim has come close to crossing the line. I think he says the phrase crossing the line 4 or 5 times in the film. It's meant to be repeated on purpose, I think. There's this like strong sense where Park is a fairly nice, kind person, it seems like, right? He treats people generally pretty well, even those, who are his help. But he talks about staying in their lane a lot, right? Like, don't cross the line. There's a problem with crossing the line. And it's not really clear what he means by that. He never states what that is. And we're kind of left to open it up to interpretation what exactly he's talking about. But it has to do, it seems like always with doing what you're told to do, doing what you're meant to do, what your purpose is, and not sort of exercising your freedom, right? Not pretending you're my friend, not actually engaging me in a way where you can challenge me or my status over you. It never says that, right? There's a strong element of that being the content of crossing the line, which it seems innocuous, but not.
Yeah, well, it's handled really well in the car scenes with him and Mr. Kim. There's the one bit where he tells him to keep his eye on the road. It's like, don't get too chummy and look back here too much. Keep your eye focused on what your job is, right? Like, don't mistake my jovial laughter here for friendship and equality. Keep your eye on the road.
That's the key, right? Because it comes right after this moment where Kim does a favor, or seemingly does a favor for Park, even though he's actually deceiving him, right? By giving him the card for the maid service, and then saying you can just tell your wife that you found it, right? So you can score some husband points. And so Park laughs, and he's like basically saying, "Thank you for giving me this favor," the kind of favor that a friend does for a friend, right? Okay. But then immediately Park has to say, "But you're not my friend, right? You're my
employee." That's right. There's that moment of male bonding, but it can't ever be fully equal, right? Like, oh yeah, let's I can earn those husband points. Oh yeah, bro. Keep your eye on the fucking road. Hold on. Let's make sure we maintain our power structure here, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's handled so well, that scene. Oh my God. I was because it's a normal thing, right? Like, keep your eyes on the road. Like, we said it to people all the time. But the context makes that statement just biting.
And there's a little bit of a threat. Like, you're right. Park he's a very quote unquote nice dude, right? But there's a little bit of a threat. You can tell when he tells him to keep his eye on the road, right? And you're already feeling tense because, he's talked about crossing the line. You're not sure. You're also kind of, I think at least, maybe because I just know the filmmaker, and so I'm like waiting for something. So I'm like on the edge. I'm like, something fucking weird is gonna happen or bad is gonna happen, and so you're just waiting. So the moments of tension are handled so well, and you don't. I mean, I don't think you really even know what it is until it finally happens, and you're like, what the hell am I watching? Which is why it's so interesting, because you think that this might be a moment when something bad is going to happen, or someone's going to walk in now and they're going to see something, or someone's going to overhear them, or one of the kids is going to see the Kims, like when Mr. Kim touches Mrs. Kim's butt or something, like you're like, something's going to give it away, and that none of that gives it away. You're just waiting for the plot to be lost somehow. And so the way that he can maintain that tension, and then he kind of just pulls you back into the story, and it's like, this isn't the reveal yet, and you kind of see that in those moments too. And I think that's kind of also when Park says eyes on the road, that's also you kind of being like, okay, let's just settle back into how things are going to flow here for a bit.
I love that you mentioned, having seen Bong Joon-ho's films, you're waiting for something like crazy shit to go down, right?
Yeah.
When, I don't remember I think it's Mrs. Kim is the one who discovers the basement, right? Because the previous maid comes down and she's trying to open it up and can't get it open.
Well, they kind of all go down. They kind of all go down together.
Yeah. So,
but Mrs. Kim is the first one down at the bottom. Yeah.
Yeah. When it opens, and then there's like this like dramatic kind of weird music playing in the background, and they're walking down the steps to the basement. What did you think was going to happen?
I don't even remember what I thought was going to happen the first time. I remember just going like, "What the fuck is going on?"
I know, right? I mean,
like, is there like
having seen Bong
cult?
Joon-ho's films, I think there's like a cult or like a monster or like dead bodies or like cannibals or some shit.
Yeah,
I was waiting for something huge to happen.
An ancient burial ground or some shit like that. Like, what is going on?
But I'm glad it didn't, because then you have to have this extra element of, we're talking about people being unable to relate to each other properly. Even the poor people are unable to relate to other poor people properly, right? You want the Kims, and I don't remember the name of the previous family who were the workers there, but you want them to engage in like solidarity, right? Like just take the house for yourself, right, and share it.
That's right.
But they're
Class solidarity, bro.
But that's
Yeah,
just
no.
unrealistic. They're completely unable to do so, right? Like
That's
they
right.
have to look rationally. They have to look out for themselves and what they have, and so they're at odds for that reason. They're in conflict for reasons that they can't really surmount, even though you really, really want them to.
Scarcity, man.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Scarcity creates fucking conflict, right? Yeah, I really like that actually, because I think that adds that other layer of complexity. When the man comes up out of the basement and he attacks the Kims, he doesn't attack the Parks, right? And then of course it's because they have tension built up and stuff like that because of how they've been treated and whatnot once they find out that they're living down there. But he comes up and he fights them. So you're like, whoa, dude, hold on a second. You guys are part of the same class. Shouldn't you guys be like linking arm in arm and saying like, fuck the bourgeoisie? No, that's not how it works, right?
But you
And
understand the resentment. Yeah, it makes sense.
Yes. Right. Yeah. It's just a really nice, nuanced perspective on the consequences of economic and social and class inequality. Right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think, it seems like Bong Joon-ho's done the really effective personal, like intrafamilial drama before with like Memories of Murder and Mother. And then he's done even like The Host. I watched The Host last night just to kind of compare the two movies. And even The Host has that like intrafamilial stuff. I saw a lot of connections in the family dynamics in The Host with Parasite, even though The Host is kind of a silly action monster movie. And then he's done the big social critique with Snowpiercer, right? And maybe a little bit of Okja too. But this combines them all. It's like the Aufhebung, the synthesis of those two elements perfectly captured, right? I mean, yeah, I can't imagine. I'm really curious to see what he's going to do next, given just how great this film was. If he's going to take a huge like left turn or kind of stay more in this domain, if he could possibly do it again. That'll be super interesting because this definitely feels like a kind of a peak film for someone who's kind of encapsulated their entire career into a film.
And he's pretty young, so
50, I think.
Not like, yeah, I mean, for a filmmaker, that's really young, So you got to think he's probably still got a good, 10 films in him if he takes his time, 5 to 10, somewhere in there, depending on how quickly he churns them out.
Yeah, we can hope so. And I really hope that it means that South Korean cinema can get have more impact on American viewers, because I don't know what is in the water there, man, but there's just some crazy, awesome shit that comes out of South Korea.
I know, man. I actually just rewatched Old Boy recently for the first time with a friend, and
what a movie, man!
Gosh, man, such a fucking movie. She was traumatized for like 2 days after. I was like, I'm sorry for traumatizing you. She's like, I can't get this damn movie out of my head. I was like, I know, it's fucked up. It's fucked up. Before we move on, I did want to ask you about the ending of the film, though, because I kind of tend to think, I have a way of reading the ending, particularly the final kind of like stare into the camera and Kevin's fantasy and the letter that he writes to his father. I have like a way that I think I like to read it, but I wonder what you think about it. Like, what's your interpretation of that? What's going on there?
Yeah, what's your take?
Well, okay, so my take is, so he's got this rock, right? The stone, the landscape stone thing. And he holds on to it, and he says something at one point when they're in the gymnasium after they've been flooded out of their home that like it follows him wherever he goes. And I imagine that's like the haunting of the American dream, the capitalist dream, the Korean dream, right? And then he kind of like submerges it underwater, which I think is kind of like maybe he buries it under the unconscious, or like he doesn't get rid of it, but he's not holding on to it, but nevertheless it still becomes part of him. And then of course the rock is what like doesn't kill him. I mean, maybe it does kill him. That's what one way of reading it. Maybe he actually does die, and then the rest of the film is just like a fantasy. I don't know, but maybe not, because he is kind of the protagonist. But maybe not. Let's say he doesn't die, and we just take the film at face value, and he just has to have brain surgery, and he gets fucked up. But is there still a sense in which there's like a metaphorical death? Because previous to that, all of his activities, his ambition, were family oriented. It was about getting the family in there, right? The family was this really tight unit from the very opening scene. It's the family. But at the very end, what he says in the letter is that he's going to forsake family and he's going to forsake having children and everything like that simply so that he can get rich. Now, it's so that he can get rich so he can buy the house so he can free his father. And then, of course, his mother's there with him. Obviously, the sister has died at this point. But nevertheless, he says he's going to forsake his family and having children and stuff like that and getting married simply so that he can get rich. So it's almost like because he's submerged the ethos of the capitalist dream under the unconscious, it's become part of him now. And now he will do everything in his power simply so that he can get rich. But of course, he has to die first. Kevin has to die first, and this new person has to be born that has brain damage. And that's the person who's going to eventually like rise up and then pursue the Korean dream. And then, of course, this is all a fantasy as he's talking about this, and it pulls in just like slowly on his face, but it's a very neutral stare. So there's like both this element of tragedy and also maybe an element of like prosperity or ambition, or let's say an element of hoping for prosperity and wealth, which is what the stone symbolized, that you can't ever separate from the tragedy, that like the two of them are intertwined, right? That the ambition and the tragedy go hand in hand in the current late capitalist system. That was what I was thinking about it.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought too much about that specific part of it, but yeah, it does seem like, he doesn't show it in the film, but in order for Kevin to do that, to engage in the sort of ambitious trajectory of his life to get enough money to buy the house, he has to forsake not only like his future children and stuff, but his own family. Like he can't live in, in the slums and become rich, right? He has to like probably exist away from them and leave them to eventually come back and rescue his father. So there's probably like some alienation that happens there. The family engages in their grifting activities together as a family unit, right? It's the way their family exists
right
with one another. So yeah, he'd have to leave that, right? And kind of leave his mother, I'd imagine leave his mother alone in a sense. It's not said, I'm just kind of speculating, but yeah, you have to imagine there's some alienation that happens before the embrace at the end when his father comes out of the basement to be free.
And isn't there an irony here? He has to leave his family unit, that tight, social, connected community that he has, who are all grifters, and he has to leave them to really, quote unquote, authentically and let's say honestly make his millions so that he can buy the home. But then we've also just been introduced to this parasitical relationship that even that authentic pursuit itself isn't necessarily like benevolent, right?
Yeah,
so,
and it makes you wonder if that embrace is really going to end up being an authentic embrace at that point, or has he changed so much that he's like a different person, right? We all know the experience of, the kid who goes off to college from a rural area or whatever, and then comes back for Thanksgiving or Christmas or something, and like a different person, and they don't really have an authentic relationship anymore with their family. Like it's a stereotype, but it's one that exists, and it's a sad one, right? It's one where even amongst good people, it feels like now we're of different classes and we don't have the same interests and the same values and the same even ways of talking, and it's alienating to have that experience.
Yeah, and I think that's why like him getting smashed over the head is so interesting, because it's almost like he dies. Kevin, he dies. He's dead. Whoever wakes up out of that coma after the brain surgery is not the same anymore, And that letter is clearly written in a different tone, even though there's an element of longing for the father and to release the father. It can only be done and realized through embracing that parasitical relationship, but from the other perspective, right?
Yeah, I mean, isn't it great that you can have such an authentic, effective view of a family of poor people without them being like romantically like noble savagized?
Yeah.
It's so brilliantly done in that way. I love it.
Yeah, it's when I see movies like this, this is what makes me say that like Marvel films aren't cinema. And I'm not trying to just shit on the Marvel film. I will see another Marvel film in my life. It will happen. And I will enjoy another Marvel film in my life. I'm going to pretty much guarantee it. But this for me is what cinema should do. It's what cinema can do. It's visually stunning. The acting is unbelievable. It's funny. It hits you in the feels. It is a microcosm of the current state of the world at the moment. And then also, it is Bong Joon-ho has said this is the most Korean film he's ever made. It's a story about family and love and loss of love and relationships and marriage and having children. And I mean, it like almost deals with fucking everything. And then at the same time, it's entertaining. It's fun, right? Like I was in a theater filled with Koreans, and it was just amazing because obviously they got all the inside jokes and they got all the references that I probably didn't get. But what it did is it just raised the energy of the theater. And I've had a couple of viewing experiences like that where I've been with an audience, like in Scotland when I saw Filth, which is based on an Irvin Welsh novel, and it takes place in Edinburgh, and it's James McAvoy, and it's fucking hilarious. And I think even though I may not have gotten the content of all of the inside references and inside jokes, I got the affect of it because I was, with this community that got it. And it was very similar with this as well, that they just raised the level. They just raised the pathos, almost like a communal pathos that tuned us in even more to the activities on the screen. It was amazing. That to me is what a cinematic experience can do. Now, maybe I just am at a different phase of my life, and so maybe a 7-year-old has that, or like someone who's a real big Marvel. See, that just sounds like I'm denigrating it. Like only a child can enjoy the Marvel. I don't mean that, but like someone who's really, really, really into the Marvel films. Like maybe they have a similar kind of experience because they experience that community pathos as well. And maybe I'll have it when I go see the final Star Wars film, or something like that. So it's not that the big blockbuster films can't do it. It's just that there seems to be something qualitatively different about what this film can do and does than what a film like Endgame does,
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And, this community aspect, we're talking about it as being a uniquely like theatrical experience, right? Our cinematic experience. I think that's true. And it's not to denigrate the Marvel films. You have a certain kind of communal experience when you go to an opening night Star Wars film or whatever, right? And it's fun and everyone, gasps at certain spots and then laughs at others. And it's a great feeling. It's wonderful, right? I think it's kind of similar to going to a game, right? It's kind of but it's purely exterior experience in the sense that it doesn't have the interior or interioristic depth that this kind of cinema has, where not only do you have this great time with other people and experience something with other people, but you're also affected the same way at the same level of depth as other people. And you don't know that's happening because you're not in their mind, but it is happening. And you can almost like feel that sense in which you're being challenged and ever so slightly changed as a person. Your thoughts, your values, your beliefs are being affected by this film because it's so good artistically. It has that certain artistic value to it. And it's just not going to happen in a Marvel film, which is fine, but it's not going to happen. And that qualitative difference isn't one of, being better than the other, or, you're childish if you don't appreciate the artistic value of Parasite or something. But it's a different thing, and we can be attuned to that without denigrating one or the other.
Totally. I mean, I think in summation, since my Sticky Leaves is actually not about film, in summation, what we're saying is, or what we're asking is, would you rather be a man dissatisfied or a pig satisfied?
Don't even quote Mill up on this bitch.
I kid.
Wait, is it the pig from Okja though?
Yeah, that's right. It is. It's the pig from Okja. Yeah, I'd rather be that pig.
Yeah. Or
was it a pig?
What's the Miyazaki film that has the flying pig? Porco Rosso. That one's awesome. I'd rather be that pig satisfied.
Okay, perfect. Done.
All right, so let's move on to our next segment, the Sticky Leaves. This is where one of us talks about whatever it is that's giving us meaning in a potentially meaningless universe. So, Austin, what's giving it to you this week?
So it's not film related, but it's art related, I guess. It's music related. I went to a Halloween party thing the other night, but it was like an emo punk hardcore costume party. at this hotel here in Sydney, and it's this like party function organization event thing. I don't even know what you'd call it, but it's called like AM PM emo night, and they run it like I don't know once every couple months or something like that. But they happen to do it for Halloween weekend. So, everyone gets all dressed up and stuff like that. And they have like emo, punk, hardcore bands play. And, the music is, it's better than I thought it was because they're actually established, Australian bands and stuff like that play. So it was actually better than I was expecting it to be. I thought it was just going to be like kind of like local shitty bands, but they were actually really good bands for what they were. And that's not really what my Sticky Leaves is. My Sticky Leaves is there was a moment when I was there and I was outside of like the mosh pit area, but I was sitting there with my beer and I was looking and I didn't see a single cell phone in the entire area. And I was like, am I just like not noticing them or what's going on? I didn't see a single cell phone. And all I could do in my mind was flashback to when you see picture footage or video footage of like electronic concerts, EDM concerts, and it's all cell phones. It's all cell phones. It's only fucking cell phones. And this makes me feel like I have figured it out. That EDM is just simply a cultural fucking fad so that people can take pictures. But there's something about rock music that is still, like, granted, you're throwing your body around, so maybe you don't have your cell phone on. I'm not saying nobody had their cell phone, but this is Halloween, man. This is a night when everyone wants to take pictures of themselves and be self-indulgent because you're dressed all sexy or weird or scary or funny or whatever. And nobody had fucking cell phones. They probably did in the other parts of the bars, and that's great. But when the music was playing, the cell phones were in the pockets, and people were just either listening to the music, holding their beer, or they were throwing their bodies around. And it was wonderful. And I was like, I got really excited. And I was like, well, maybe it's just like now, and like the phones will come out later. And they didn't come out at all. It was brilliant, dude. Except for when I took my phone out.
To take a picture of the no phones?
Yeah, exactly. I did. I took a picture of the mosh pit. But yeah, I thought it was great. And I don't know. I don't know if this is a trend, that like at punk shows and hardcore shows that there are no cell phones, and that at like electronic shows and pop shows and stuff like that, everyone's got their cell phones out. But I would be curious. I kind of like want to attune myself to this now. I want to see this now. Like I'm going to go see like Pennywise and Strung Out here in a couple months, and I'm going to pay close attention to what's going on at that show as well. Because I bet you around the pit, people will have their cell phones out. But then of course in the pit, and maybe it's just simply because you're throwing your body around and shit like that. But at EDM shows, people are dancing like crazy maniacs and everything like that. And just everyone's got their fucking phones out. So maybe there's just something totally self-indulgent. Plus, I just don't really love that kind of music, so I'm going to talk shit about it, and I'm going to use this as my excuse to justify why rock music is better.
That's so funny, dude. I had kind of the opposite experience on Halloween. I went to a show that was a bunch of cover bands who were playing, like, there was a Buzzcocks cover band and Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds cover band, and
oh, fun.
I forget what else, but they actually like dressed up as the band. Like I saw the guy who was Nick Cave walking around before they went on. I was like, that dude is Nick Cave. He had and if you've seen Nick Cave's haircut, he's the only person who rocks that haircut in the world on purpose. So it was very obvious. And the bands were actually really good, just like your experience. I was surprised at how they were actually they had like a 8-person band on stage to be Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, and they had like a full on like marimba out there. I couldn't believe how orchestrated the whole thing was. But then the audience was talking so loud the entire time. I couldn't.
That's so lame.
I've never been to a show where every single person was ignoring the concert and just talking to one another to the point where I could not hear the band. It was audibly part of the sound. The people talking. It was so annoying. I couldn't believe it. And it wasn't just like a thing that happens here, because I saw Explosions in the Sky at that same little club a few weeks ago, and that was not an issue whatsoever. Maybe that was just the audience or whatever for like a hipstery post-rock band is the kind of audience that's just going to sit there and listen. But yeah, it was super annoying, and I almost like we even left early because I was just like, I can't even experience this authentically because of the like assholes who were around me. But yeah, kind of an opposite. Not with the phones in terms of being opposite, but in terms of like audience engagement and authentic experience, kind of seemed a little bit opposite.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of the thing that I enjoyed so much is that's precisely it. It was audience engagement with the performance on stage, you know, which I'm a performer kind of through and through. I since I was a kid, I've done performing to some degree or another, and I think I just love it. I gravitate towards performance because I've been thinking about this a lot, just about myself lately. I think there's just something. It's almost like I think I have a hard time like being totally open outside of certain contexts, but in the context of a performance, for some reason, I'm able to be fully honest, even if the content of what I'm saying isn't honest, like in an acting performance. There's still something at an affective or at an emotional level that is true. And I know actors talk about that shit all the time, but it's true. It is an experience that I have felt on hundreds and hundreds of different occasions, that you feel that connection, whether it's in an acting class or on stage when you're touring around in a like a play, like a theater play, or whether it's in a film set or even just a fucking like music video or something like that. I've felt it many, many times and it feels real. And I have a hard time, I think, feeling that same level of like expression in like analytical or in propositional contexts. And so I think that when I'm standing there and I'm seeing that, and I'm seeing the audience engaging with the performers and the performers engaging with the audience, and they're in each other, like almost there's this integration. Like for me, that just like makes my soul sit, like just sing,
Yeah, it's like even just basic respect for the person who's doing the work up there. Like this person is probably sacrificing a lot to do what they're doing, at least throughout their lives they have, right? You should show them some basic respect, even if you're not into what they're doing. Yeah, I never get my phone out, even if like an opening band is playing and I'm not into it. Just like I'm getting my phone, I'm just gonna go outside or like go to a corner or something, right? Some space dedicated to not being in the audience, just to show some like basic respect for the person who's playing. It's kind of like it's kind of lost, right? Again, we're talking about this like relating to each other properly kind of thing. There's this kind of expectation now where it's like if you're not entertaining me, I don't have to show you respect, right? If you're not doing for me what I'm paying
That's
for,
right.
then I don't need to. You're just a tool to be used, and I can just ignore you if you're not doing it the way I want. That happens like, I guess it's not super prevalent in America as much as it is in some other countries, like talking during movies. But that's the thing that I've experienced more lately than I have before. And definitely in concerts, it's huge now, where if you don't like what the opening band or whatever is doing, then you can just kind of disrespect them and not have any expectation that you should be acting otherwise. And I just don't get that. I don't get this sense of distancing yourself from the humanity of a person, even if they're on stage and performing. Like that's not going to affect them in any way, or that even if they didn't notice, that it's just wrong to do that. I don't understand it. I hope it doesn't continue down that road.
Also, I think it's a symptom of a larger tendency that people don't give themselves over to otherness or to the negative, but that they only allow for things that already fit within their like patterns of enjoyment, right? Or their patterns of perceived enjoyment. And so you engage in this like process of serialization where you foreclose yourself from potential opportunities. And of course, this isn't an absolute, but this is a tendential thing that I think is part and parcel of a world where you can specialize everything for yourself, right? And where you can, modify the algorithm so that you only get certain types of films placed in front of you, or only certain types of news publications, or only certain types of coffee, or only certain types of clothing, or only certain types of people, only certain types of language, only certain types of film, et cetera, et cetera. And so everything is so personalized and specialized. And so it just creates this weird kind of like, it's a kind of like a solipsism. I'm thinking about, what's that fucking Charlie Kaufman film? Anomalisa?
Oh yeah, man! What a good but not entertaining film. That's like the ultimate apotheosis of the unentertaining film that you nonetheless have to appreciate.
But you know what's amazing about that film is what is it that ultimately sparks him to life? It's otherness. He hears that other voice. And so when you go to a concert, sometimes, yeah, maybe the music isn't the music that you love, and maybe you're there and you're trying to hit on a chick or whatever your reasons are for being there. But if you can just expose yourself and open yourself up to this artistic expression or to this event or whatever it is, wherever you are, then sometimes that can actually be that songbird, like the other voices in Anomalisa, that can like spark some kind of joy or stimulate some kind of life inside of you. So I'm all about that. I'm all about staying open to the potential for the possibilities of being sparked to life by the songbird. Is basically, that's like my life.
That is your life, dude. But even like for someone like me who does not have the openness to experience mark checked on their psychological like Facebook survey or whatever, how could you? I don't understand how you could want to live in such a way that everything you experience has to be qualitatively similar to what you've experienced before, right? That's such a lacking way of going through life, whether it's in your own individual experiences or in artistic experiences. Yeah, I mean, there's nothing like wrong with it, nothing necessarily wrong with it, but it's such an impoverished existence. Who would want to do that?
I know. All right, the last thing I want to say too is this is just like kind of a part 1B of my sticky leaves. I just fucking love moshing, bro. And I know that I said I'm not a booer in the last episode, and I'm not a booer, and I'm not really generally like a cheerer unless I have a few beers in me. Dude. But I'm a mosher for sure.
It's a species of the genus cheering.
Yeah, but like one of the things that I love so much about being in the mosh pit too is that people don't understand the cordiality of the mosh pit. I have had this happen multiple times now where I've lost a shoe and someone has like helped me find my shoe, or they've tapped me on the shoulder and been like, "Here's your shoe, dude." And I'm like, "Thanks, man. I lost my shoe." You know, you knock somebody on their ass and then you pick them up, or
help
somebody
them up,
picks them up.
You have to.
Yeah. Right, man. There is like a respect in the midst of the, what would you call it? Like orchestrated violence?
Or organized chaos, yeah.
Have you ever been in one of those, what's it called, when it's like the wall of death, where you get like the two sides that just run at each other?
What do you mean?
Do you know what I'm talking? So you'll have this at like metal concerts where you'll have like, they'll create this separation in the crowd, and you'll have like this one wall of people over here, and then 100 feet away, you'll have another wall of people, and then the person on stage will be like, "All right, on the count of 3, 1, 2, 3," and then the two sides just
fucked up. Yeah,
they just converge and they run at each other full speed. Have you ever seen it before?
Yeah, I don't know if there's a name for it, but yeah.
I thought it was called Wall of Death. I don't know what it's called. Bro, I've never been in that before because I don't go to a lot of metal shows, and I feel like it's a more metal thing. But dude, that looks awesome.
Wait, have we ever been to a concert together?
I don't think we have, actually.
I don't think so. How's that possible? It's because you've lived so far away most of the time.
For so long, I've lived far, yeah. Yeah, and then whenever we're back in the same area, it's like we don't usually go to a concert. We should, though. We should really do that, especially if I come out to where you are now.
Yeah, for sure, man. Oh, speaking of that, great. Dude, I just saw this thing called the Simon and Garfunkel story last week.
Okay.
And it was this like, it's basically a cover band of two guys who look like Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel. And they play a bunch of the hits from the late 60s, early 70s. And then they have this like slideshow in the background, and they intersperse the narrative of Simon and Garfunkel as a group throughout the songs, or in between the songs. But what's funny is there isn't a narrative there. It's just like they got together and wrote songs, and then they broke up because touring was hard. So there's no actual like dramatic moment in the narrative.
Oh gosh, that's funny.
And then the best part was the end was like giving the epilogue of Paul Simon or Garfunkel, and it was like Paul Simon wins 17,000 Grammys for Graceland, and Art Garfunkel like writes some poems that nobody reads.
Oh, that's so good.
But the best part was, we're talking about audience engagement here. The entire crowd was like over 65 white people.
Oh, yeah.
And they were eating this shit up, dude. They were whooping and hollering, and like they got up and stood like 7 different times to give standing ovations. They were just eating this shit up, and it was so adorable to see. These old
That's
people
good.
get so into this stuff, man.
Yeah, I used to go on bike runs with my buddy's dad, who was like a Harley guy. And I remember one time we were in Laughlin, Nevada at one of the big bike runs in the States, and they had a Bob Seger cover band. Oh, man. Drunken Harley motherfuckers and Bob Seger.
Yeah,
Oh, I loved
that's a
it so
match
much.
on kerosene for sure.
It made me see my future. When I'm in my 60s, I think I'll be a Harley dude, just grizzled, and I'll be an alcoholic, and I'll have some partner who's got like big old fake bolt-ons, and we're just gonna rock leather, and it's gonna be amazing. And I'll have like leathered face because I'm just suntanned all the time and shit. It's gonna be amazing.
Wait, so have you been to a metal show? Like, what's the most metal show you've been to, or at least like the hardest
I mean,
show you've been to?
I've been to a ton of like metalcore, hardcore shows, but I've never been to like death metal, black metal.
Okay. You've never seen a goat sacrificed on stage,
No, I haven't.
mock dead bodies, yeah, none of that stuff.
No, none of that shit. Yeah.
Black masses.
Nope. But yeah, I mean, I've been to tons of like, I guess like speed metal influenced metalcore kind of bands, kind of stuff. But yeah, no, that's it. But that's just mostly like it's mostly like scene kids, moshing around.
Yeah, so I wonder, like, I've been to some metalcore shows, and it seems like those audiences tend more towards the hardcore than towards
Yeah.
the metal, because like metal dudes are usually a lot more chill, where hardcore dudes can be a little bit more crazy.
Yeah, they're
So
doing the hardcore dance and swinging their arms around, doing the windmill and kicking and shit like that.
Yeah, and the metalcore tends, even though it's supposed to be metal and hardcore, it tends more towards the hardcore. So yeah, if you've been to some metalcore shows but not to some actual metal shows, then you're missing a certain level of audience engagement, or a certain mode of it, at least.
I did go to this tiny little bar here, and you might be able to help me understand this. And it was definitely more like death metal, but I wouldn't call it like a show because it's more just like this tiny little dive bar that does live music kind of stuff. But I got a little bit of the vibe. But they were like, "Put your fucking hands in the air," and everybody put like they didn't do like the devil sign or anything like that, like the horns. They like put their hands in the air like they were holding like a chalice or like a cup or something like that. Is that a thing that you know of?
Oh, weird. So like their fingers folded over a cup.
Yeah, kind of like imagine that, and then like all their hands went up in the air, and I was like, "Oh, are they just toasting like they're having a beer or something like that?" But I was like, "No," but then everybody in unison knew to do it, and I was like, "What are they doing? Like, is this a metal thing that I don't understand? Like the metal chalice that you're toasting, you're
Drinking the
toasting
blood
to
of
the
your
evil
enemies?
demons?" Yeah, I'm like, what? I was like, "What is this?"
I don't know, man. I don't know if I've seen that before or what it is. Usually, it's just the horns, man. The metal invented the horns.
That's what I thought. Yeah. If I'm going to listen to demonic music, put devil horns up. But no,
If
this was like a
anything,
fucking...
hardcore and metalcore guys shouldn't do the horns, man. That's like cultural appropriation.
Yeah, no, they wouldn't. Yeah, this was a metal show. This was like a death metal band thing, for sure.
Huh.
This was. Yeah. But I don't even call it, like, I wouldn't say it was like a proper concert, because it was just like this tiny little dive bar where this band happened to be playing. But everyone kind of knew. Maybe it's like an Aussie thing. I don't know.
Maybe. My favorite I don't know what's like the genius of the symbol you make with your hand during a concert. Whatever that is. My favorite species of that is during a guitar solo. When all the guitarists in the crowd raise their offhand and do the like the tapping thing on the fretboard. I love that, man. It's so funny. I don't know why it's so funny, but it is.
That's amazing. Yeah. Totally.
What is it about air guitar, man? It's just like you almost have to do it.
Yeah,
it's like your body gets just like possessed, and you have to start air guitarring. It happens with drums too, I guess, right?
Well, even people who don't play guitar, right? Yeah, drums for sure. For me, it's drums because I wish I could play drums. Right? So that's the one, But God. But yeah, man, that's my sticky leaves. Love going to concerts. It was great. And I hadn't been to that kind of concert in a while. And so it was great to just throw my body around a bit. And like I said, remember that meme that was going around? It's like, I can't remember what it was. It was like someone would show a picture of like the French Revolution and they'd be like, "Oh, look, just a bunch of people having fun, no cell phones in sight," or whatever it is. All I could think about was that. I was like, "Oh, just look at this. There's a bunch of fucking people around and no cell phones in sight." It was great. Well, cool. Well, let's go ahead and wrap it up there. Thank you all for tuning in to another episode of Owls at Dawn. As I said at the top of the show, if you go to patreon.com/owlsatdawn, you can find out how to support us there. And obviously, if you leave us a review or anything like that on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Stitcher, I don't know if they do reviews on Stitchers, but if somehow we can get access to the review, let us know if we skip over it. But if you do leave us a review, then we'll go ahead and read it out on the show. If you ask a question, of course, if you give us a 5 stars, then we will. You can email us, tweet us, Insta us, whatever. Just find us. You can reach out to us. And I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, dude?
Just one more thing I can think of to say, man.
What's that, dude?
Das Vidania, Amerikanski.